In a tweet this morning, President-elect Donald Trump seems to reaffirm his hardliner stance on Cuba in the wake of Fidel Castro's death. But any promise to roll back the openings to Cuba made by President Obama could face strong pushback from some U.S. companies and pro-business factions of his own party. Joining us now to discuss is Wall Street Journal Associate Editor John Bussey. John, thanks so much for being with us. I'm going to read quickly the full tweet. If Cuba is unwilling to make a better deal for the Cuban people, the Cuban American people, and the U.S. as a whole, I will terminate deal.
Yeah. Now, he could do that. So
Good.
Obama did this through executive order. He's going to be president. He can reverse it through executive order. But he's got some kind of momentum against him on this. One is the very powerful business sector, which has already begun making its steps into Cuba. Hotel chains are kind of opening up relationships with state-owned enterprises there to service tourists. Airlines are announcing new service. American Airlines is about to start it directly to Havana. There's commercial flights as of September. Other businesses, telecom companies, are offering roaming services around the island. So the business community is kind of already there.
It's entrenched in a way.
It's starting to get entrenched. And the agriculture community, many of the rural voters who elected Donald Trump, see this as a huge opportunity. This is a place that has been ceded to the European Union and to other farmers around the world. They want a piece of the action.
So by taking a hardline stance, who is Donald Trump trying to appease? The Cuban American community?
So the Cuban American community is still big and powerful in Florida, but there's been a demographic change there too, right? So this was always a community that politicians were very keen to address and to address the concerns of. That is, political repression in Cuba,
right.
Economic repression, religious repression. This is an authoritarian government.
Absolutely. And John, I have to say I can speak to this personally because coming from a Cuban American family, I can see in my own family, there are, yes, some of the older generation who still support the embargo, but even those numbers are shrinking. And my generation and younger doesn't really care about the embargo.
Yeah, so I think that this is kind of partly what's happening, is that, it's not just the Cuban American community, but it's the, the values of the United States that we don't support, this kind of repression. But that Cuban American community, as you're saying, is getting diluted by the fact that there's generational shift. And going for, Obama's argument has been, look, we normalized relations with Vietnam. We had a war with Vietnam. We normalized relations with China. Neither of those two countries have kind of given in on political repression,
right.
And the detaining of political and imprisoning of political
Sure.
opponents.
So if President-elect Trump feels he must do something sort of to save face, what is he likely to do? Roll back some of the, let's say, travel restrictions that President Obama lightened up?
Could do that. Could do that. Could make it a little bit more difficult for business to get more entrenched. Maybe he goes back to Cuba and says, look, you're going to have to relent on some of these issues. It's going to be very interesting to see whether Cuba wants to do that. They're trying to now stabilize things after Fidel Castro's death.
Absolutely. And there is a danger that if President-elect Trump becomes too blustery and his rhetoric becomes a little too aggressive, I worry that some hardliner factions within the Cuban government, the little that remains that's hardline there, might see a resurgence of sorts, increased military exercises, some anti-American rhetoric of its own.
Completely possible. On the other hand, maybe there's a little bit less to lose with Cuba. Cuba needs this entrenchment of U.S. business. It needs this economic adrenaline shot. It's coming. This is like a museum piece of socialism. I mean, this is like right out of the diorama. You should go to Cuba just to see how much damage an authoritarian government can do to its people.
Absolutely.
Before it changes and there's a Starbucks in every corner.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned earlier, perhaps President Obama was counting on this business surge, this U.S. business surge, to sort of prevent any future administration changes.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think people underestimate the power of the U.S. business sector. I mean, we saw this with China. The accession to WTO in the early 2000s was driven by the business community. All those door knocks on Capitol Hill, the American Chamber of Commerce of Shanghai and Beijing coming and making sort of regular rounds on Capitol Hill, convincing Congress people to allow China into the WTO. This is the same dynamic now President-elect Trump is facing.
It's a hard momentum to stop.
Yeah.
John Bussey, thank you so much for
Pleasure.
that.